Good day, everyone. So, you have made the decision to outsource your customer service. The paperwork is all signed, the expectations are met. Now it's time to put the plan in motion. My name is Alex Kouskalakis. I'm the communications director at GlowTouch. And today we'll cover the steps that are necessary for the successful implementation of an outsourcing plan. I'm joined today by Charles Davis. He's our Vice President of Client Advocacy, and his role is to make new clients comfortable and work with them on creating the conditions for a successful outsourcing program.
That's right.
Charles, welcome, and thanks for the time and sharing your expertise.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Good to be here. Good to talk with you.
I guess let's begin at the beginning. What would be the key elements that have to be in place for a smooth onboarding process?
Yeah, so the terminology is always a bit misleading too, right? People use onboarding for a variety of terms. You can think of the development of the relationship when sales is in process and business development, and then you sort of onboard a partner, but then you move into what we refer to, at least at GlowTouch, as the implementation process, and also sometimes referred to as mobilization or onboarding. But what is really key is a collaboration between the client and yourself as the provider, right? You have to have complete and total participation from both stakeholders. What's really important is that collaboration, a very detailed project plan that outlines all the milestones, the timelines, clear expectations on the scope of work, and really the big one is, is there a clearly stated understanding of what the client's expectation is for success in this implementation? And then once you do that, and of course, things like executed documentation, MSAs, SOWs, and such as that. But once you have those things in place, then you can build an implementation plan around that and begin the process.
Is it reasonable to say that, sort of like in any sort of let's say in a competitive event, or maybe even not competitive, but a corporate event, before you can achieve victory, you have to know what it is. You have to be able to
Yeah,
define it. So, I guess, is
right.
that what you mean by success? That there has to be a mark on the wall that says, this is what we're trying to achieve. Okay, now let's put the plan to help you get there.
That's it. That's exactly right. And it's circled around some big pieces of information that you want in the discovery process that leads to implementation with the client. A big one is, what's the required expected client launch go live date, and you work backwards from that. The other one then is, what are they partnering with you to achieve, right? What is their measure of success? Is it around quality? Is it some sort of impact to sales? Is it around better customer response, better CSAT, KPIs, SLAs, very specifically to what it means to the client, that says you are executing this program in such a way that it's bringing value to them.
Okay. Is there
Yeah,
a typical timetable in mind, or is this going to be the sort of thing that varies based on the size and complexity of a program?
it does vary, Alex, but it varies in terms of, typically, a really accelerated implementation can be as short as 3 weeks, but ideally what you're looking at is 4 to 6 weeks, because what's built into that is developing the relationship, the implementation meeting cadence. Then you have to establish hiring and recruiting requirements and a really good runway to get the right resources in place for whatever the program requires, and working towards that launch date. So typically it's in that 3 to 6 weeks. We'll kind of broaden it, right? And it's always great if there's a flexibility around that start date. But what you want to do is focus in on the client's required date to launch into some sort of productive feedback for them.
Does it continue beyond the launch date? Do you stick with a client to where they reach I guess what we would call a steady state, where the program it's gone past the ramp up, everybody's gotten comfortable, agents know what to expect from the client's customers, and the KPI targets are now becoming, yes, we're there, that sort of a thing?
Yeah. So the implementation project manager, which I probably should have mentioned, is another big piece of this. Is that we provide a dedicated implementation manager that creates and sort of is that one focal point of information and communication to conduct the orchestra, if you will, from the time we start until we get to the launch point you're referring to. And we do pick a time frame based on steady state. Have we reached a wave one ramp of people and resources for the client, and are they now performing, and are we moving into the direction of meeting some SLAs? You have a ramp period, so you don't necessarily expect to hit targets right away. But if you are in a place of moving in that direction, what we typically do is we would have a phased handoff to move the meetings, the cadences for implementation activities towards operational support. And the implementation manager would begin to sort of phase out, always available. And then we ensure some backup resources, client advocacy support to ensure that everything is happening. And do we need to back up and do anything to take a look at what's happened so far? But normally we try to transition that over to an operational standpoint and call it good right on the implementation phase.
What are the expectations of the client? I would imagine that more participation is always better than less, but what's reasonable? And would there be a great deal of difference between, say, a client who is outsourcing for the first time versus one who has been through the drill before?
Yeah, client participation is absolutely critical. Actually, to meet or even exceed the participation of the provider. What we need is we need to ensure that we are juxtaposing what we're doing over clear expectations that they provide, and that we are not missing the mark anywhere. There are cadences that are set up for weekly checkpoints on milestones, timetables, what we're accomplishing, and also, to ensure that do they have any flexible need themselves to back up and say, wait a second, let's restart, let's check something. Very often what you get in this allows you not to be caught off guard by client participation is, we are adjusting maybe the scope, the direction, or we need to extend the time to launch to later. So all that really is just to say, this is the first chance to move relationship to partnership, and partnership in the implementation is necessary. Finally, getting to your second question, absolutely, there is a bit of a difference for someone who's outsourcing for the first time versus someone who's been through the process. There's going to be a little bit more of a watchful eye. They want to make sure all the checks and balances are there. Important things like security, compliance to IT and systematic things, ensuring that their data is safe, and ensuring that we have done everything we can to begin to give them evidence that we can accomplish the SLAs, the output that they want. So there is a little bit of probably more of a careful watch and a slow down to the process when you're dealing with someone who maybe hasn't outsourced before. Very long-winded answer, but there you go.
No, that's okay. The long-winded probably works because I've seen one of those implementation plans. There's a
Yeah,
lot more to it than somebody might think at first glance because it's not what
sure.
I do on a daily basis. The
Right.
first time I saw one of those things, I thought, wow, this really gets deep in the weeds. But I
Yeah,
guess you have to just because there
has
are
to
so
be.
many contingencies that have to be accounted for.
Yep, absolutely. From the time you identify the scope of work, the number of resources, the IT requirements, the hiring process, the training, the length of training, the output on SLAs, and of course that all important launch date. What's the required go live date? All that. There's so many subtasks to the larger tasks that have to be done, and that's why it's so important to have a collaboration and ongoing communication.
Is there some flexibility within the plan? I mean, I'm sure that there are certain gotta have features within it, but is there a little wiggle room based on what a client is doing? And I guess along the way, we probably learn a few lessons and say, step number 31, for example, needs a little bit more effort. Step number 40, probably a little less. And that's kind of a gross generalization, but I think, is it a living document or is it pretty concrete?
Yeah,
Or
so it's a
both?
living document. I'm sorry, Alec. Yeah, it's a living document that we ensure that is in a shared format, so that in fact the client can review it, update it, have input to it at any point in time. That creates some of the flexibility. There does have to be some flexibility built into the timelines, simply because, to your point, you want to have some space for anything that may veer to the right or to the left, anything that needs to slow down or speed up. So there is flexibility built into it. The challenge becomes if you're dealing in a situation where that launch date is fixed and it maybe has some business and or financial impact to the client, then that date needs to be met. You have more flexibility when you have a situation that whereby the launch date is considered this is what we prefer versus this is what we have to have. But yeah, and we've learned some things along the way. Some of the challenges can be change in work scope midstream, changes in the suddenly in the number of required resources to conduct the particular role, um, lack of participation sometimes by a client. You really have to encourage, and you want a client that is engaged. You don't want to, here's what we asked for, let us know when you're done. But we have learned to overcome all those challenges. We make it very, very clear and enjoyable in our discovery process that says, hey, we can't do this without you, and we are truly creating a partnership here. So yeah, there are challenges in there, but there has to be flexibility built into the process to overcome those challenges.
I want to pick up on the partnership point that you mentioned. And we talk a lot about it in our various materials. We talk about it when meeting prospects, that we're not just a vendor. We want to learn what your business is all about. We know what service is. Now we just have to define service to fit what it is that you folks do, and to make it work for you, and for us to
Right.
become part of your brand. Um, does it sort of set the tone for what follows in terms of open, ongoing communication? If we establish it now to where we're working together before the program ever even starts, we're probably going to continue working together once it's up and running.
No, absolutely. And I don't know if I mentioned this before. I always, sort of use the analogy that the implementation process is kind of the bridge. We build a bridge from the time a client decides to do business to the live launch. And in that process, you are establishing a partnership. And one of the things that we really like to emphasize is we want the resources and the work we're doing to become branded to the client's brand. One team, just simply augmenting what they're already doing. We build in a mindset to the resources that are going to be connected to this, that they are a part of that team. And once you do that, and once the client sees how much we involve them in the process, first of all, that buys confidence from them, and it brings buy-in from them into the process. And it does create a level of comfort for them that, hey, we're not simply providing you some bodies in a seat somewhere. We are wanting to be a part of your team. And so what we do, Alex, as implementation phases out and the operation teams takes over, is we provide dedicated client advocacy support that continues that same level of communication without, so that at no time there's any breakdown in opportunity for a client to reach out and say, hey, you might be hitting some KPIs, but you're still not getting what we want. You're not grabbing the philosophy. You're not grabbing the brand. And that really has been the success that sort of allows implementation to phase right into a full-blown partnership. But what I love about implementation, again, is when a client first begins to engage with GlowTouch, it's a relationship because there's communication going on. Partnership begins when you sit down and you roll up your sleeves and you say, all right, let's get this thing going together. And that's when, then once partnership starts, man, that's really that's the groove.
Okay. What does the perfect client look like? And maybe perfect is the unattainable standard, but let's go. What does a pretty good client look like? Just for this part of the process. I mean, I realize that some folks do things differently. We've engaged with folks who have a very particular goal in mind. We've engaged others who are content to let us sort of drive the train a bit. Where's that sweet spot in terms of, man, if I could draw up the ideal client to work with on an
Yeah.
implementation plan, they'd look something like this.
Yeah. In my role, your initial question, I'm inclined to do the right thing and say all the clients are perfect clients. But you ask a great question, and for the most part, we typically get clients that fit this pretty good client mold, which is to say that they want to come to you and say, look, I know what my requirements are, I know what I need from you, and so I want to participate in making sure that you're doing that along the way, but I want you to be the experts. When they say to us, we trust that you are the experts to make this happen. Here's the ingredients, here's the tools, here's what our output needs to be. When output is clear and they have the buy-in to participate, and they want to be on board in helping us check milestones and check timelines and check outcomes along the way. But they say, we know you're the experts. That's the ideal client. Where we run into struggle sometimes is, and it's understandable, a client is giving away a piece of their business, if you want to call it that. And
Sure.
so when it's hard for them to relinquish a little bit of that and begin to trust that we're here to not be oh, by the way, a plan B, but we're going to be a part of the team and a part of the partnership. That's the client that really makes it a smooth process. And they become very enthusiastic and relieved by that when they're able to let that go.
Yeah, I think I've said more than once and put in some of our written materials that a lot of times the customer is or the client is trusting us with its most valued asset, their
Exactly.
customers. That's
That's
a
right.
great deal of trust that's going on, and I guess this process serves to build that, to establish it, to set ongoing communication,
Yep.
and to be able to say that, look, we're in this together.
Yeah, that's a great point. The implementation plan also serves as sort of that therapeutic opportunity to help get them to a comfort level before full-blown operations is in place. That's a great way to look at it. Yeah.
Okay. Is there something that we're missing? Some other aspect of the implementation process that I didn't ask about that you think needs mention?
I don't think so. I mean, it's made up of, we could talk hours, right? We could get into subtasks and all the
Sure.
requirements and the fun things that there is to do. We've covered it really well. It's that client that brings clear expected output requirements, a live launch date. They want to be involved. They're a part of the regular cadence. We end up getting to schedule lots of these offline calls that are about things specifically. We'll get involved in IT to IT calls and HR to HR calls and training calls. And then we come back together and we meet. And as long as they're participating and meeting regularly, that we are hitting the mark and doing the milestones, that's the big deal. And our point on the wall, I think you used that term earlier, Alex, is that go live launch date, that we hit it and we hit it meeting the requirements that they've asked for. And once you do that, man, you're off to a great start and a great partnership.
Last question, and I think I probably should have asked this one a little bit earlier. Am I correct in assuming that a lot of the process involves uh, peer-to-peer communication? In other words, our HR people would work with their HR people,
Yep.
IT with IT. So at least you have people who speak the same departmental language.
That's exactly right. You bring them all together in the weekly cadences, but a number, I used the term offline calls referring to the breakout calls. We will schedule HR to HR, IT to IT, and then we take the results of those calls and we come back into the regular cadence, which is 1 to 2 times a week. And we check together on how we're doing. Are we meeting requirements, timetables, milestones? Is that being hit? Absolutely.
Okay, very good.
Yep. Yep.
Charles, I appreciate the insight. Thanks very much.